Thank you very much for this introduction and also for coming here, listening to us. We're not going to talk that much about NFTs, but more about think facial culture and sort of interfaces, to make a pun on that. Facial recognition and production of faces have become an increasingly important part of interface culture. The face is used for identity verification on smartphones, at borders, and in public space. But alongside this development there's a new facial interface culture, we speculate. The dawn of this was seen in the smartphone's reverse camera function and the proliferation of the selfie, but has since then been accompanied by a diverse set of facial filters. Additionally, users can access relatively simple services to produce non-existing faces or GAN, general adversarial networks faces, and there are techniques to produce deep fakes. Faces can also be offered as non-fungible tokens, to make a reference to the prior session. So in this panel, we want to address how the face has become part of the interface and present examples of cultural and artistic practices around this. There will be 4 presentations, and my name is Ulrik Andersen. I will give an introduction to our theme, and then I will be followed by Mette-Marie Sørensen, who will talk about deep fakes. Then Nicola Bozzi will address facial filters and maybe a little bit on NFTs. Yeah, and finally, Søren will address facial identification. And all of us will provide examples of how artists seek to reflect how the interface itself reconfigures the meaning of the face. So our general curiosity centers around the question of what a face is, recognizing that the face is not a set thing. It changes with its representation and mediation. As argued by German art historian and cultural theorist Hans Belting, media technologies have historically played an important role for how the face is regarded. They capture the face in a representation or a mask that not only represents the person, but also reflect a wider cultural history that counts portraiture as well as ritual masks, and now add to that cinema, video, and interfaces. So, what is a face when its representation has been substituted by a diverse set of technical and mechanical processes? What are the social and cultural implications of a face that is swiped, read by machines, manipulated, faked, or commodified via distributed ledger technologies? Belting suggests that we live in a digital masquerade, a somewhat dystopian era where the face, and I quote him, rejects any traditional claim of true resemblance and likeness of a real human being, marking a shift to a condition in which the relation between the face and the subject is more than ever before grounded in a radical disembodiment. But we ask ourselves, are there not less dystopian perspectives on this interface? Do we have to mourn the loss of the bodily representational identity? What happens if we exclude the psychology of adding filters and making GAN faces and so on, and we begin by treating the face as a technical object in itself? Katie Shack and Andrew Salier's performance perfect movement engineering for better everyday zooming provides a good example of an artwork that treats the face as a technical object. In short, the work is a live instruction tailored to help the participants optimize their bodily behavior in front of the camera. For instance, they invite participants to practice the attentive nod, which they break down into specific facial mechanic features, the correct movement and tempo of the head, continuously and even, not too much, not too fast, as they say in the performance, the position of the eyebrows, not too much, you don't want to seem surprised, and all of which convey subtle differences and failures of the nod. As they remind the audience, be careful to manage the micro movements of the face, your eyebrows and your cheekbones. People will notice what is happening across your entire face. The attentive nod, along with other micro movements of the face practiced in the performance, draw attention to how the face functions, not only as an indicator of a person's inner self, but also as a technical object. And to frame this aesthetic and non-psychological understanding of the face, we can turn to the French sociologist Marcel Mauss and his lecture, Techniques of the Body from 1934. Mauss notes how Maori women acquire a loose-jointed swinging of the hips that looks ungainly to us, but was admired by the Maori. In Mauss' thinking lies the assumption that the technical cannot be entirely separated from the human bodily. In fact, and I quote him, the body is man's first and most natural instrument, or more accurately, not to speak of instruments, man's first and most natural technical object, and at the same time, technical means is his body. To Mauss, techniques are also habits. This is not a question of habitude in French, but a habitus in a Latin sense. In the habits, we see the techniques and work of practical reason rather than the soul and its repetitive faculties. One could say that they are not just personal habits, but that we are inhabited by them, and that they point to a cultural specific logic of sense-making that also defines us as human beings. Media technology seemingly play an important role in inhabiting the body, reflecting on how the women of Paris walk. Most bright American walking fashions had begun to arrive over here thanks to the cinema. The positions of the arms and hands, they are not simply a product of some purely individual, almost completely psychological arrangement and mechanisms. The bodily habitus itself mirror a larger system of perhaps not media, but of industrial production more broadly. With reference to Mauss' contemporary Siegfried Kracauer, one might say that the grid view of the video conference is a mass ornament, an aesthetic show of the habits of platform production. All of us nodding attentively, or more commonly, glaring into the screen as seen in the work by Kyle MacDonald, People Staring at Computers. MacDonald's works consist of an application that takes a picture with the computer's inbuilt camera, uploads it to the blogging site Tumblr, and projects the collection of portraits back to the viewer, and then begins to cycle through older photos of other users. MacDonald installed it in Apple's hardware stores across New York and received quite a bit of attention because of legal issues. But aside from this, it displays how the bodily habitus of the face the one that we recognize across all users is that of the interface itself, a navigating attitude. Even when most productive, the user revolutionizing the world as Apple once envisioned it, paradoxically remain still. So with this, I would like to swap to the next speaker, Mette-Marie.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you all for coming. The aim of this paper is to reflect on the issue that in deepfake videos, one's face is face swapped, and sometimes this means that it is stolen. How many of you have seen a deepfake video online? Good, because I'll not show any examples of videos today, due to the fact that my main concern in this paper is face swaps in animated pornography. In order to reflect on face swaps, I benefit from the analysis of already historical pieces of electronic art. In 2010, German media artists Andreas Melas and Stefan Stubke developed the artificial smile camera, which is used to investigate the possibilities of real-time auto-retouching faces in digital photography. The subject's mouth is immediately replaced with someone else's smiling mouth. So 13 years ago, at the exhibitions of Artificial Smile, videos with auto-retouched smiling faces were shown, and the audience could choose to have the portraits photographed. The audience laughs while watching the interaction takes place. It is funny because it is artificial. It is like the two-dimensional sculptures in amusement parks where one's head is transposed to the body of a famous superhero or Disney character. It is funny because it is uncanny, but also because it is so unconvincingly executed, because the technology was still in the early stages of its development. So we laugh at the technology used. It is an indulgent laugh and indicates that we are in a confident state of control. The construction and the fakery are obvious. Today, the Artificial Smile art project is already old media history, owing to improvements in the use of machine learning in photo editing processes. In 2017, Face app was released. This app generates naturalistic-looking transformations of faces in photographs by using neural networks. The app can alter a face to make it smile, look younger, look older, or different gender. The difference between the 2010 art project Artificial Smile and the 2017 commercial Face app is that the retouching of the facial features has become naturalistic. The use of artificial neural networks and the amount of data involved makes the changes to the photographs much more accurate. Face app is an example of how advanced image editing tools that were previously available only to professionals and that had certain limitations have now become widely distributed and thus also contribute to the dissemination of an editable, digitized body. Today, this also applies to face swaps in deepfake videos, which were previously reserved for expensive film productions, but which are now on the way to becoming widespread throughout society. In the 2014 article Proxy Politics, German artist and critic Hide Style remarks that on the internet, your face is becoming disconnected from your butt. We lose track of and control of our faces and the uses to which they may be put. And I quote, "Face prints are taken. An image becomes less of a representation than a proxy, a mercenary of appearance, a floating texture surface commodity. Persons are montaged, dubbed, assembled, incorporated." Back in 2008, Japanese media artist Daito Manabe developed the face visualizer technology for performances in which electrodes send electrical stimuli to the skin of the face, which causes the face to move, for example, to the rhythm of an electronic beat or as an echo of another performer's rhythmic facial gestures. Daito Manabe's performance clearly demonstrates a separation between identity and facial expression, or to put it more clearly, in the performance appears a more than usual distinction between the two questions, who are you and how are you? In Year Zero, Faciality, Deleuze and Guattari describe how the two axes, significance and subjectification, intersect in the face. These two axes are comparable to Jenny Atkins's descriptions in her book Face Politics, which describes how much of the scientific work on face processing is based on the premise that the face identifies someone, either as an individual, as a member of a group, population, or race, and at the same time expresses an emotional state. For analytical reasons, we will benefit from a distinction between an identity axis and an expression axis. Respectively, they correspond to the questions, how are you, identity axis, and how are you or what are you doing, expression axis. And one way to analyze the face visualizer is to note that there's an interesting relation between the two axes. And one of the crucial aspects of the deepfake videos is that they separate the two axes in a more extreme manner. Deepfakes are not used primarily for fake news, but to create non-consensual pornography. According to Deep Tech, 96% of the deepfake videos online have sexual content. Face swaps with pornographic content are being used in interactive video games and virtual reality simulations. VAM is a software for creating VR games and simulations with adult content, which is being exploited by some users to create non-consensual pornography by swapping faces onto the bodies of an animated character. Journalist Samantha Cole from Vice magazine has been the keenest follower of this development in the field of deepfake pornography, and here she describes her encounter with VAM. The neutral, realistic face of a celebrity maintains eye contact, following the user and blinking as they move around her. The user looks to the right and pulls up VAM's control interface, which displays a long menu of sex positions the 3D model can be put into, doing a backward bend, squatting, and touching herself, several versions of kneeling. Face swaps are of course illegal unless you consent to rent out your face, as in this case. And in a more philosophical and ethical context, face swaps are characterized as persona plagiarism. To conclude, a face-swapped pornographic animation is a violent act in which the predator animates, hence moves the victim. The moving image has strong affect, and the movements of the face-body assemblage evoke a past, even though there is none. In a longer version of this paper, I have argued that this makes the act impossible to deny. Furthermore, owing to the character of ecologies of attention on the internet and their asymmetrical distribution of affect, it is probable that no attention will be paid to the victim's statement, "I never did this." Thank you for your attention. And now I'll hand over the microphone and stage to Nicola Bozzi.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have to figure out how to play the slides. Okay, this is the forward one, right? Okay, perfect. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Especially thank you, Christian and Søren, for inviting me to be part of this great panel. Today, first of all, my name is Nicola Bozzi. I'm a lecturer at King's College at the moment. And today we'll be discussing AR face filters in the context of the commodification of the avatar. So I will give a bit of context about this. First of all, you might be familiar with face filters and some of the controversies that were associated to these very simple AR applications that were initially introduced by Snapchat and then cloned by Instagram, and also now are very popular on TikTok as well. So they've become a very familiar cultural format by now. And some of the controversies about this format were about representation, about how a lot of these filters were embodying particular normative expectations, damaging especially to young women. There were some racist tropes as well in some of these filters. So there were a lot of controversies about face filters in terms of representation. And all of this is really, really important. But what I wanted to look at as well is how these filters, beyond the representation potential that has been discussed also in the previous presentation, they have this whole infrastructure element. Because we've seen with the Twitter phenomenon, the Bored Apes profile pictures, we've seen collectible avatars on Reddit. There are even applications specifically tailored to incorporating NFTs and collectible avatars basically as face filters. So let's say that the face filter as a format is kind of very conducive to particular versions of a sort of actual existing metaverse, or at least some kind of gesturing towards an infrastructure for the performance of identity that could potentially capture value, depending obviously on who is able to tap into this. And I think this is relevant also to the presentation that we saw earlier about artists. One thing that I thought was really interesting in terms of platforms and the capture of value is the fact that Meta, as a company that was kind of at the center of innovation and ushering in mainstreaming face filters with the acquisition of Instagram, Meta has been always involved in a lot of issues with automatic face tagging, for which they were sued in 2011. I believe they were forced to erase biometric information they collected about their users after Cambridge Analytica. So there is a lot of bad history that Meta has with capturing people's faces. At the same time, surveillance here is not really quite the point for me as well, because in 2019, Meta also launched Spark AR, which is a free software for the creation of these applications, these AR applications that people can create by themselves. And I think this is very interesting because it kind of represents a bit of an artistic turn in Meta's strategy, probably in view of the rebranding towards a metaverse company, which is failing miserably at the moment. So Spark AR was introduced as a software for artists. There were collaborations with Tate Modern. Artist profiles from the community were showcased in a blog and Facebook communities. So there is really this emphasis on platform on AR face filters as art. And as we've seen from media theorists like Joanna Zielinska, who talks about a lot of AI art being effectively platform art, right? Because the infrastructure for the production of AI-driven art is often owned by particular companies. Artists are often basically training their algorithms by engaging in their art. So there is always this relation between AI art and platforms that's been documented before. And AR face filter is also interesting because they're a small interface within a wider interface and potentially tapping into these other infrastructures. So effectively, they're also relevant to this concept of the meta interface that Søren and Christian have written before about. So my question is, how is this socio-technical environment shaping the aesthetics of the avatar as a mass cultural phenomenon? What type of original cultural forms and sociocultural tensions might emerge from AR face filters, and to what extent can they be used critically? Because we're here at a media arts conference, so we know what we mean while engaging with media critically. So what is the margin that this type of technology allows people who create AR face filters? To kind of do a bit of recognition about it, I looked up, this is a bit of an older, these are older screenshots, but basically I looked at the filter taxonomy on Instagram, how the filters were organized. And these are official categories that were in the interface. As you can see, they're pretty much all connected to, you know, people you follow, world, events, causes, so things that happen in the world, people you know, very much a social kind of taxonomy, socially oriented. More recently, I've checked again, and now these categories are trending, appearance, aesthetic, games, humor, special effects. They look a little bit more self-referential, kind of all about this kind of immersive environment, which I thought was kind of an interesting evolution. In terms of criticality, Politics, I looked for specific keywords, trying to see what kind of political causes were espoused, represented. You could find different types of causes and figures all over. And I think this is obviously interesting in terms of what does it mean to wear a mask representing a political cause, tapping into collective identity. Also, there is a lot of celebrity culture, as you can have this deep fake filter of Yilong Ma, who is already a clone of Elon Musk made on a Chinese, in kind of Chinese version. And just like there is engagement with celebrities, there's also engagements with brands, both in terms of brands creating their own face filters, sometimes in the phenomenon kind of symptoms of woke washing, trying to appropriate particular political causes related to identity. And other times it's users kind of engaging playfully and even adbusting famous logos in their own performance of the everyday. If you look for art directly, you see this type of engagement with, existing artworks or this kind of filtery ASCII art, emoji art. And because of this, I was wondering, okay, where are the politics of spectatorship, right, that Claire Bishop famously wrote about in Artificial Health? How does the ARFS filter challenge a dynamic of participation between the art and the viewer, which in this case is also viewed in the same context as the art? So there are a few examples that I found. Jess Harrington is a famous one. She made this filter, draw with jelly, so the camera is flipped and you can create solids in some AR environment. Cluster Duck, they work a lot with memes. They created this sort of ironic face filter where things are framed and they play with a boundary box aesthetic of AI as something pretentious, something boring, also gesturing to kind of artistic elitism perhaps. And Valerio Veneruso also kind of making a bit of a reference to an older Ito Steyer video. He made this how to disappear filter where essentially the person is erased from the camera, and there is just a kind of a disclaimer, sorry, the person does not exist. So it's kind of a play on existing critical media art. Keeping in the tradition of tactical media that has been mentioned before in the previous panel, we have examples like Leo Salvaggio's Apologize to America that is reminiscent of some yes men techniques, although obviously more tongue-in-cheek, where users were invited to use this filter by adopting Trump's face and apologize to the country. So if you were ashamed of being American, or you could be able to apologize through Trump's face, thanks to this filter. And finally, tapping into this idea of phantasmal media that Fox Harrell has written a really fascinating book about. Alla Pop's queer feminist AR face filter, I mean, it taps into this idea of challenging the stereotypes, challenging representational stereotypes, and kind of embodies this non-threatening post-human version of AI instead of this kind of alienating alien as something more inclusive and more like in a more traditional political cyborg sense in this case. So that's it. Basically, this is a bit of an early stage of my exploration of these artists. If you have any suggestions for artists that use this technology, please let me know. You can contact me there. And otherwise, I thank you very much. And I pass the microphone to Søren. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, thanks for coming on a Saturday. This is the title of my part, Blinded by the Profile, Behind the Hiding of Algorithmic Enunciation. And I'm going to start a bit with the flaneur, though I'm not going to talk a lot about the flaneur, but sort of talk about whether the flaneur is still alive as a technosocial reader. So we've seen a lot of important research and art exploring how platforms target, track, and survey us. It's been less while we've seen a lot of that, it's been less explored how users read and respond to this. Obviously, the more people read and respond, the more and more precisely their profile. So we're in this lock. And Johanna Drucker has argued that the algorithmic profiling of platforms tend to render a situation of amongness, as she says, it's a quote, which is characterized by the specificity of identity without alterity. So we sort of locked into our identity. And this is also seen by Drucker, not surprisingly, as a counterpoint to critique and undermining of alterity, but also fiction, literary fiction, an aesthetic activity, sort of all in all, and a leveling of the enunciative system. And corporate data-driven platforms serve to instrumentalize and capitalize on cognitive resonance, as he says, withinness and amongness, as ways to exploit social empathy in an effective economy, while difference and otherness are leveled out. So if the current traits of enunciation and alterity are disappearing, how do we then develop ways of reading and understanding contemporary kinds of generative textualities, from social media platforms to GPT and stable diffusion and other AIs and machine learning systems? This hiding of algorithmic enunciation that you see as part of these systems leaves readers and viewers increasingly clueless about how to understand, read, and analyze algorithmic text and images. However, we should not forget that reading and seeing is also, as we know, a complex, intellectual, and highly educated property. Readers and observers facing these algorithmic processes will gradually update their reading and viewing, reflecting how the output they are reading and viewing is produced. We don't read all text or watch all images the same way, but have developed nuanced ways of reading, from questioning cunning narrators and authors to enjoying irony and ambiguity in poetry and looking outside the visual framing. So a conceptual model for a techno-social reader, or you could say a contemporary flaneur, is perhaps the lurker or the zombie, which are human readers that mirror the algorithmic readers and agents behind profiling, structuring, and generating the visible text to human readers. An artistic example of this is the ad-covered zombies in Daniel Howe's advertising position from 2017, which you see here. And furthermore, profiling is part of the production of a digital subject, according to Olga Goryanova, where, and I quote, "the face becomes the new fingerprint through digital subjects, though digital subjects also offer sides of reinvention, liberation, and play." And she sees this as a political struggle related to interpellation, the concept of interpellation. And to go further this way, I'm getting through the theory quite quickly. Dubryn and Gorham have developed a concept of algorithmic hyper-interpellation relating to platforms and social media that furthermore draws on Rangier's development of interpellation and its distribution of the sensible, which includes Rangier's distinction between the police, that is the force interpellating us, and the politics, which is his word word to describe the political struggle this interpellation entails. Also, when we realize that we are being interpellated and how this interpellation is misfitting. So consequently, there might be potential for developing critical reading strategies if we can better understand the distance between ourselves and our digital subjects, which Goryanova also points to. How to get further in this understanding and how to understand how this distance is produced, and I'll turn to my main example and talk about sort of the algorithmic police and politics in this. And it's an Instagram-based project called In Transitu, made by the Copenhagen-based artist Ada Hyldal Fogh, also appearing as Ada, where she explores the policing and the politics of a specific kind of algorithmic interpolation and profiling, which is the way that gender recognition is used to censor images on Instagram. So to make sure that Instagram is not used for what could be sexual content, pictures with visible female nipples are banned and erased from the public profile, while male nipples are allowed. So consequently, questions around identity and sexuality seem particularly well suited to critically understand the policing and politics of a visual platform such as Instagram. And in Transitu, she presents her project as a continuation of earlier trans activist campaigns. There have been several sort of show my nipples campaigns before, since 2017. And so each Thursday since, in this project since December 2021, she has posted her pictures of herself during gender transition with visible nipples as, and I'm quoting, as a challenge to the Instagram moderation protocols. Furthermore, she sends these images to commercially available gender recognition APIs, that's what you see on the right, API services. And so far, Instagram has not fully blocked her selfies, though it was temporarily blocked after more than a year of hormone therapy in March this year, but allowed back on the platform a week later. So currently she continues her project, though the other services often register as female, though usually they disagree with their results. So the project demonstrates the discrimination caused by letting commercial services evaluate people into binary genders and controlling access via US neo-Victorian moral ethics, part of the sort of infrastructure of Instagram, which, as also pointed out by another activist, trans activist, Janice Rose, will, and I'm quoting, potentially use algorithms to gravely impact trans people's ability to live in society. The project very precisely analyzes what it takes to be perceived as a specific gender. And I'm quoting, as you can also see here, the logic seems to be short hair equals male, long hair equals female, long hair on one side only equals 50% male, 50% female. She thereby explores how she's enunciated by the interpellative algorithms of gender recognition and how this entails policing, to use Ranger, though this will mainly become visible as this policing will mainly become visible as a deletion of her image from Instagram, as we saw the temporary attempt at doing on the 30th of March this year, and a potential banning of her profile. In fact, she writes that it is not mentioned whether this was an automated takedown or whether a human moderator was involved, but and it's in this text, her account seems to be subject to shadow banning, meaning that it becomes less visible and no longer shows up in research or feed recommendations. So in this sense, even the deletion is kept invisible. However, on the 5th of April, this image that was deleted is reinstated again with no explanation. So over the project's extended period from its beginning in December 21, it becomes increasingly clear how Ada turns gender recognition into a public performance that systematically works with the feedback she gets from the algorithmic enunciation to further explore the profiling she's subjected to as a minority digital subject by literally, of course, exposing herself. Besides the discrimination, the project points to the arbitrariness and absurdity of gender recognition models and the binary and biased understanding of gender they build on, constructed through image sets. Consequently, she points to a specific distribution of the sensible and the way gender is constructed in our culture and policed by hyper-interpellative algorithms. The project is also a convincing demonstration that gender is not only biologically, but also culturally and technologically constructed, as not only a gendering of faces, but also as and through gender recognition models, that is algorithmic interpolation built on predictive models and image sets. Ada explores the apparatus behind gender recognition, how it fits and misfits, and thus she turns the policing of the algorithmic interpolation into politics by demonstrating its distribution of the sensible, or to put it in other words, she explores and uses the visible language of gender through playing with the distance between her image and the way it is misrepresented and misrecognized as a digital subject. Her project is already from the outset positioned as political, which is also addressed in the many comments on her images, suggesting new ways to experimentally address the gender recognition algorithms, thus taking part in this discussion of politics. And she also does some further experimentation that I don't have time to get into here. So the project in transitu demonstrates how we are all captured, modeled, and recognized by machine vision and profiling. As a performance, it uses this as a stage to reflect on how we are being staged, and she puts herself in exposure, which is, of course, not without risk, especially for a transgender woman. This might seem more like putting herself in a vulnerable position of being blinded by the profiling than developing a protective way of reading or seeing how she's algorithmically enunciated. However, she also demonstrates how to resist by exploring the strategies of algorithmic interpolation and enunciation. So even if she is controlled and policed by these binary structures, as we all are, she will not let them define her and her gender, but keep on exploring the techniques and technologies of gender misrecognition. So in this way, she maps out a space for critical alterity, and as technosocial readers, we can learn from her performance. So as a trans feminist performance, she's facing face recognition and returning its gaze as politics.
Thank you, Søren. Now we have it's a panel, so what we envisioned is that we would not use all our time just delivering 4 presentations of 15 minutes, but actually allowing 15 minutes of response from the audience. So it's difficult to see with light here, but I don't know if there are any questions from the audience to us. I think if not, we also imagined it as a conversation between us. We initially met at we known each other for years, but we met at a conference last year on AI and the humanities, and discovered that we had this mutual interest in faces. So maybe one way of, while you are reflecting, if there might be a question to begin this conversation, is perhaps also to hear what we've learned from each other. And I think while you think, one of the things that struck me was something that you said, Nicola, that you talk about the infrastructure for the, you talk about facial filters as an infrastructure for the performance of the self, if I'm not I hope I'm quoting you correctly. And I think what made me think is, yeah, that's right, but then what self? Also thinking that if the self is infrastructured, then it also changes with the changing of our infrastructures, meaning that it's not a stable thing. Of course, I remain myself, but what I perceive of the self changes. And I think that makes our situation, and I guess, and for sure also the examples that you put forward, interesting to me in that they try to reflect the sort of changes in self-perception that come with these infrastructural changes, and not least the politics that follow with them, because they are sort of corporate infrastructures that I think in Søren's example become clearly a space for political intervention. And I think that and also the fact that you point to, Mette-Marie, that there's a sort of larger history also within the history of art that we need to attend to understand this. And I think that's something that this collaboration really gave me a better understanding of.
Yes, and what strikes me, because I've been working on the philosophy of the face and technologies of the face and civilians and contemporary art for a decade or so, and I totally agree to the fact that the face is always already a medium, and it's interesting to look at also the media, not only history, but media archaeology, to understand why the face arose as an interesting medium. And maybe that was the beginning of the film. Until then we had theater, we didn't zoom in to the face, we didn't consider it to be a face for identity and emotions and expressions, etc. But what strikes me with my interest here with deep fakes and the issues of having one face stolen is the fact that I have to stick with some sort of essence or index that the face is actually mine, even though the mediation might change it. And I've also been working with the issue of deepfakes of dead people, and then the issue of essence and ethics and identity have some other problems, but that's one of the things that interests me here, not only the mediation from the outside, but also that we have a skull and a brain and it's ours.
Thank you for. I think this is the idea of the infrastructure. The ARFS filters as part of an infrastructure for the performance of the self. I think the term infrastructure is important because we've seen also in the previous panel, identity is really increasingly because the representational part is so. It changes a lot, and there's so much ambiguity to it. And people who work, for example, for NFTs, the blockchain projects we heard, they're trying to create these decentralized infrastructures. And the fact that these super big platforms are, getting a step ahead in this, I think is very significant to be, and it needs to be considered every step of the way. And also, I think it was interesting that the artists that you showed in the first presentations, they were using Zoom, which is a very office kind of technology, because people didn't really use Zoom before the pandemic outside of a work environment, I imagine. People were always meeting on Skype, and then Zoom became this big kind of new thing that we were all doing. And so I think in terms of the self, to answer the question, I think it's about a rediscovery of a kind of a collective self, right? And that is also to go back to the first presentation, a bit of an instrument to tap into this political aspect, that to tap into either wider categories like in the project that Søren talked about, or also even, as Mette-Marie was just mentioning, even reaching out to family histories, for example, dead people. I'm not sure in what context. Obviously, there could be different contexts that people draw from dead people, but I think it opens up a lot of opportunities beyond this kind of dreadful infrastructural pervasiveness that could also be definitely an element. So I wanted to, just pass it on to Søren if he has something to add.
No, I was also, Christian started asking, to what degree is this loss of bodily representation or facial representation, or also liberatory? How can it also set us free? What kind of possibilities does it have? And Mette-Marie talked about, quoting Hito style, about when the face and the bot becomes disconnected. And of course you talked about how this sort of disconnection also becomes commodified. And I'm just really also interested in how these infrastructures but also software works in both capturing but also becomes strategies to and tactics to perform with and to play with, and of course it also has to do with the fact how can we develop as readers of these kind of technologies, including the text and the images they produce. When we're sort of entangled, we are already on the screen in a specific way. So I think you could talk about identity politics. It has some positive dimensions, but also, of course, a lot of critical questions that we see in our time broadly. But if there's any questions, also you are welcome to. There seems to be one up there. Yes.
I'm going to try to formulate this as a question, but I was just thinking back to Søren and Christian's work in meta interface, and thinking about how this talk surfaces the face as a meta interface. And I was thinking of some of the other types of commodification of faces that occur and have occurred in web internet culture for many years. For example, the fact that that Facebook, in some sense, already owns your face at the same time as there is this element of self representation, and then in terms of thinking. So it sort of enables this self-representation while it's owning your face. And I think of like looking at the way that my kids interact with face filters, particularly around things like the release of Marvel movies or other sorts of corporate promotional endeavors. Where actually, the kids get very excited about this sort of self-representation as Iron Man or as the latest Fortnite avatar. So I'm just thinking about this. My question, I guess, is how do you see this sort of commodification of the face as fitting into a generalized theory of the meta interface?
Well, in a way, it almost is in the title of the panel in the meta interface, we kind of ask the question, where does the interface disappear when it becomes even? It seems to be a constant trajectory of interfaces that they are disappearing or they are designed to disappear, and that was sort of the question we followed also in the meta interface. And you could say now maybe the face is the new interface, in of course in very concrete ways, as Christian said, when you unlock your phone, basically you do it with your face, and it becomes sort of your, through profiling, identity, across platforms, and it becomes a commercial structure. It becomes a technological structure, as I guess we all pointed to, and it relates to a lot of also larger issues around, say, gender and other issues as well.
What I find so super interesting about the Ada case is this ambiguity or the desire for recognition. So as banning can become a success, so to speak, and I think this ambiguity is also enrolled in facial surveillance and biometrics, the desire for recognition as well as the right to disappear. And I think these issues around the face are very, very important in interface culture.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And obviously, I think of this as at least my own interest as a continuation of what we wrote in the meta-interface. But if you think of the face or its representation as some kind of extension of human activity, as a typical way you'd think of an interface, or I can sort of represent my face on Zoom, and that's no problem, sort of a post-phenomenological approach. I think maybe you don't fully get that the face in that in that it assumes a habitus, as I was speaking of, reflects a structural condition of the use of interfaces that you also find in social media, video conferencing, and filters, as mentioned in this. So it's kind of sort of reflects a larger condition of corporate software that feeds on inhabiting us and inhabiting our bodies, and also even sort of more intimate details of our bodies. So in that sense, I think the face is sort of I think super interesting in relation to the meta interface and this sort of dissolvement of the user interface into our bodies, which was something that we didn't talk much about in the book, actually, bodies.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to add something about Facebook owning people's faces, right? Because when people, and I think this connects with what the performance in transitu that Søren was talking about, and generally this whole shady character of Meta and Facebook as companies, is that at the end of the day, I feel like the way that, because the policies are sometimes obscure, sometimes arbitrary, as it's shown in the case of the nipples on Instagram, but at the same time, people choose to kind of undergo this type of vetting, this type of interpolation, because they want to be on these platforms, because that's where the social happens in a lot of ways. So that's why I think the infrastructure element is necessary, because if you think about the DAO, it was said earlier that the DAO doesn't really need to have the mission, but the growth of the network can be the mission, right? And I think this issue of scale is very, it's very much relevant now. How can you maintain a governance that's human while scaling up? And what are the compromise that you have to do to live with if you're joining the biggest scale there is, these super huge social networks? And that's also why what we are talking about is often just tactical interventions that cannot engage, for example, with the code, or the outer layer of the meta interface, let's say, the one that disappears the most, right? So I think this is, there's a huge area of discussion there, I think.
A huge area of discussion. I think that's a sort of end note. But I think our time is up. We've spent 1 hour. So thank you very much for coming and listening to us. I hope you enjoyed it.